You are listening to The Soul's Quiet Call, written by Akumah and voiceover by Sara. Akumah Audiobooks. Chapter 29, The Road to Healing. The early morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a gentle glow on the room. Meera lay beside Aarav, her head resting against his chest. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat, slow and steady, was the only sound that filled the silence between them. She could feel the weight of everything that had come before, the doubts, the fears, the pain. But now, in this quiet moment, it all felt distant. Almost as if it had never been. It had been weeks since the storm, the emotional upheaval that had torn them both apart and brought them back together. And though the road to healing was long, each step they took felt like a small victory. Together, they had faced their darkness. Together, they had let go of the past. But the work was far from over. Aarav shifted slightly, his hand coming to rest on hers, his fingers gently squeezing as if to reaffirm the connection they had fought so hard to build. "Morning," he whispered, his voice still thick with sleep, yet filled with an undeniable warmth. "Morning," Meera replied softly, her voice a little quieter than usual. She felt a surge of affection for him, not because he had changed in any grand way, but because he had stayed. He had chosen to stay. And that, more than anything, had made all the difference. They lay there for a few moments, the space between them a reflection of everything they had learned to overcome. No words were necessary. They had built something beyond the need for constant validation. It was a bond forged through trust, through vulnerability, and through the quiet understanding that love, in its truest form, was imperfect. But as much as they had come through the worst, the journey ahead still stretched out before them, uncertain and fragile. The healing hadn't been easy, nor would it be swift. But it had begun. And that was all that mattered. Meera was the first to break the silence. She shifted in his arms, propping herself up on her elbow to look at him. His eyes met hers, and she saw a depth there she hadn't seen before. There was no guard up, no wall. Just him. Real. Vulnerable. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady but soft. "About everything. About us." He nodded, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing small circles on her hand. "Me too," he replied quietly. Meera smiled faintly, her thumb running over the back of his hand, the simple motion grounding her. I think we've come a long way. But we're not fixed. I'm not fixed. I don't know if I ever will be." Aarav turned his head to look at her fully now, his expression open and earnest. "I'm not fixed either," he said, his voice steady. "I've been afraid for a long time. Afraid of love, afraid of losing myself in it. But I'm starting to realize that maybe I don't have to be perfect to be loved. Maybe none of us do." Her chest tightened at his words, not in sorrow but in a quiet sense of relief. He was learning, just as she was. Learning that love wasn't about the things they could control. It wasn't about the pieces of themselves they thought they had to fix before they could be worthy of each other. It was about allowing themselves to be who they were, broken pieces and all, and still choosing to build something together. "I used to rely on my gift to see everything," Meera said, her voice a little shakier now. "To know what you were thinking, what you were feeling. It made things easier, but it also kept me distant. It made me feel like I was in control. But lately," she paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Lately, I've realized that I don't need to know everything. I don't need to see every secret or fear you have in order to love you. I can just love you. In all your messiness. In all your vulnerability." Aarav's hand found her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. "Meera, I'm not perfect. I've hurt you, and I've hurt myself. But you've been patient with me, and you've let me be real. You've shown me that love isn't about what we can see or control. It's about letting go. Trusting in the unknown. Her heart swelled at his words. Trust. It was the one thing they had both struggled with, the thing that had kept them apart for so long. But now, in this moment, it felt like something solid between them. A foundation they could build on. I think that's the key, she said softly, her hand resting over his cheek. It's not about fixing everything or knowing everything. It's about trusting in what we have. And that's enough. Aarav's eyes softened, and for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through hung in the air, unspoken but felt. Then, he slowly leaned forward, brushing his lips against her forehead in a kiss that was gentle, tender, a promise. A quiet promise that they were still here. Still trying. Still loving. The silence stretched on for a few moments before Meera spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. We have a long way to go, don't we? She asked, her eyes meeting his. Aarav smiled faintly, nodding.
Yeah.
But I think we can do it. Together. And in that moment, Meera knew that he was right. It wasn't about having all the answers or knowing the exact path ahead. It was about taking the steps, however small, and knowing they didn't have to take them alone. They had each other, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, they found themselves walking through the park, hand in hand. It was a simple day, nothing extraordinary, just two people who had decided to face the world together, despite the messiness, despite the uncertainty. Aarav spoke, his voice casual but filled with an underlying sincerity. I've been thinking about what we talked about this morning, he said. About love not being perfect. I think that's the way I want to live. With you. I want to let go of my fear of being imperfect. I want to embrace whatever comes next, with you. Meera smiled up at him, feeling a quiet joy settle in her chest. I'm glad. Because I want that too. I don't want to live with all this weight anymore. I just want to be with you. And see where we go. They walked on, the evening sun casting long shadows behind them, their steps in sync as they ventured further into the unknown. They didn't have it all figured out. But they had each other. And in this moment, that was all that mattered. As they reached the bench by the pond, they sat down, content to simply be. Aarav pulled her closer, resting his arm around her shoulder, and Meera nestled into his side. The soft sounds of nature surrounded them, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, and for the first time in a long while, Meera felt at peace. She didn't need to know everything. She didn't need to see everything. For the first time, she was simply living. Simply loving. And as the sun began to set, casting a soft golden glow over the world, Meera realized that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey. And with Aarav by her side, she was ready to take the next step, no matter where it led. Together.
Akumah Audiobooks.
Refer to the channel playlist for a better experience and close your eyes to let your imagination run wild. Subscribe.